Mr. Smallwood, we were talking last time about the role of religion in the Confederation campaign originally, and then the role that it played throughout your early years as the Prime Minister, Premier of the province. Another aspect of religion that was considered or incorporated into the terms of union was the provision for denominational education, something that had existed in Newfoundland, I guess, from the very beginning of education. But the provision for and the insurance of the continuation of denominational education was written into the terms of union. How did this come about?
Well, you'll understand, of course, that I wanted Confederation. I wanted it for Newfoundland. I knew that it was the very best thing that could conceivably happen. And I was willing to pay any decent, legitimate price to get it, because the price would be trifling compared with the benefit that would come from Confederation. And about 1/3, slightly more than 1/3 of our population at that time was Roman Catholic, and slightly under 2/3 were Protestants, or at least non-Roman Catholic. And I didn't want, when the referendum came, I didn't want denominationalism to play any part, or to play a very big part. I wasn't so simple or naive as to think that it would play no part. If it played no part, it would be the first time in more than 100 years when it played no part. But I didn't want it to play a big part. Now, the church, the Roman Catholic Church all over the world have something in particular that they have in common. They have many things in common. But one thing that Roman Catholics all over the world believe in very strongly, and that is denominational education. They feel that the education of youth is an indispensable part, of religion. And so in Newfoundland they had been champions of denominational schools. And we had a denominational school system. Now, there were anti-Confederates who were Roman Catholics. There were lots of anti-Confederates who were not Roman Catholics. But some that were Roman Catholic were expressing their alarm that under Confederation they wouldn't have their own schools. And that undenominational or non-denominational schools would come. In other words, that you might have your own schools, but you wouldn't get any money from the treasury. The government wouldn't give any money toward the cost of the schools. There could be separate schools. The Roman Catholic Church could continue to have its own separate schools, but they'd have to pay the cost of them themselves and get no money from the House of Assembly, from the government. And that, if that were true, it would mean that virtually every Roman Catholic would be bound in conscience to vote against Confederation. Then, if the 2/3 of the people who are not Roman Catholic voted for it, Confederation would come. We would become a province with 1/3 of the population implacably opposed to it. That would almost guarantee its failure. Even if it came, it would fail after it came, if 1/3 of the population, a little more than 1/3. And it was a growing third. Today it's more than 1/3, much more above 1/3 than it was above 1/3 30-odd years ago. So I was determined, if it were humanly possible. And I had long talks with Gordon Bradley, who was the chairman of our commission, you see, our delegation to Ottawa. Gordon was a Protestant, had been the Grand Master of the Loyal Orange Association. And he believed anyhow in non-denominational schools. He wouldn't have been too scared or annoyed if the denominational school system were done away with. He didn't believe in the denominational school system, you see. But I had to convert him. And I put it to him, look, Gordon, you believe in Confederation? Yes, I do. You think it's the only hope for Newfoundland? I do. You believe that there's no other hope? He says, I do not believe that there's any other hope. You think that the only future for Newfoundland lies in Confederation? Yes. I said, well, what price are you not prepared to pay? What would be too high a price for you to pay to get Confederation? For me, no lawful price is too high. I want Confederation. Can you go with that? And unwillingly and unhappily and without any satisfaction, he said yes, he would go along with it. I said, all right. In that case now, I said, I've talked with the Prime Minister, Louis Saint Laurent, and he's prepared to go a long way. But I said, what we have to do is see the representative of the church. Canada has a papal legate, a personal envoy, a sort of ambassador of the Pope, apostolic delegate or legate, such, for example, as our own Newfoundlander Archbishop Carew is now in Israel. He's the papal legate. He's the personal envoy or ambassador of the Pope. And the Pope has these legates in many parts of the world, sort of papal ambassadors. And I said, you've got to talk with him. Will you do it? Now, Gordon was a little bit shy. That brilliant lawyer, brilliant-minded man, magnificent, superb speaker, keen thinker, yet at the same time was a bit shy in meeting people. It's hard to believe, isn't it? It may not be hard for you to believe, because you probably did not know Gordon Bradley very well. But he was such a forceful personality. To think of being shy, you know. He was a bit shy, and then he had a little diffidence. After all, he was a prominent Orangeman. And here he was to go and talk with the personal envoy, the ambassador of the Pope himself to Canada, you see. And he lived in Ottawa. But he agreed, unhappily and unwillingly, to do so. So I rang to make the appointment. I telephoned the Episcopal Palace where the papal legate lived, and a man answered me, and it turned out to be two things. It turned out to be the apostolic delegate's private secretary who answered the phone, you see. And it turned out very quickly in the course of the conversation that this private secretary to the papal ambassador was himself a Newfoundlander. And not only that, but when he told me his name, I said, Carew, I know now who you are. I said, you're the son of Will Carew, the secretary to the Commission of Government in Newfoundland. He said, that's right, that's my father. Well, I said, I know all about you, Father. And you are the secretary to the papal legate? He said, yes. And I said, well, you know why we're here. He said, I've followed it carefully, yes. I said, the chairman of our delegation, Mr. Bradley, wishes to have a conference with the legate. Is that possible? He said, of course. Of course it's possible, and I would say also desirable. I said, so would I. We agree on that. And he made the appointment. The time and the place was right there in the Episcopal palace, and the time was, I think, the next morning, and I think it was 11 o'clock the following morning. I said, fine, he'll be there. And I made sure of that because I walked with him from the Chateau Laurier, from the hotel, right to the door of the Episcopal Palace. I didn't go in. I wasn't invited. And I saw Gordon, in case he changed his mind, got cold feet, right to the door. And I saw him go in. He rang the bell, and somebody came to the door, and he went in, the door closed, and I said, thank God. Then I kept walking around in a big circle for over an hour. Gordon was in there for more than 1 hour. And I said, that sounds good. This looks good. This looks pretty good. Anyhow, I didn't let the door out of my sight. And finally it opened, and out came Gordon Bradley. And he looked chipper. He looked cheerful. He didn't look a bit unhappy. His face was relaxed. And I said to him, I waited till they caught up to him, and I said, how'd you get on? He said, oh, fine. You did? He said, oh, yes, fine. I said, how'd you find him? He said, a gentleman, thorough gentleman. I never met a more pleasant man to talk to. I said, the Pope's representative, the apostolic delegate, you're talking that way about him? He said, yes. He said, I never met a nicer fellow. He said he met me, and we shook hands, and he said how glad he was to welcome me and so on. And we went in his den, and he took out a box of cigars and asked me if I'd like to smoke, and I took a cigar, and he lit it for me, and he said we sat and talked. And he said that the church, of course, was against divorce. Now, he went to talk the two questions. Denominational schools and divorce. And he said, I got a very strong impression that the church were not too excited about the question of divorce in Newfoundland. But denominational schools, yes. And he told me of the system they had in Quebec. And he praised the Quebec system very well, and he says, as a matter of fact, Joe, you know, he said, if what he told me is correct, and I don't doubt it, then what they have in Quebec is pretty fair. That Roman Catholic schools, of course, are recognized as such by the government and the legislature of Quebec, but so are Protestant schools. And he told me that the church would be quite satisfied if Roman Catholic schools in Newfoundland were treated as well, no better, but treated as well as Protestant schools are treated in Quebec. I said, well, what do you know about that? Anyway, we got, the actual clause was drafted mainly by Mr. Saint Laurent, the Prime Minister, who was himself a Roman Catholic, you see, and who had a sister who was a nun. I don't know, but he had two sisters that were nuns. And if I'm not mistaken, he had a brother who was perhaps a priest. And Louis Saint Laurent was, without doubt, no one on this earth ever expressed any doubt that he was a loyal and faithful Roman Catholic. Just as faithful as he was a Canadian patriot. If you had to make, if Louis Saint Laurent had to make a choice between his Canadian patriotism and his loyalty to his church, it would have been a terrible internal battle for him. He never did have to make such a choice as that. Well, we got the clause put in. Now, what happened was this. I brought that. That wasn't in the official terms. In fact, when we came back, when the delegation after 3 months returned to St. John's from Ottawa, we had to go back for another 3 months later on after the referendum. After the people had voted for Confederation, then the terms had to be made final. And so the delegation went, not the same delegation, I was on both of them, went back for a second visit to finalize the terms. But when I came back, when we all came back the first time, we didn't have the terms. They were mailed down to us a few weeks later, you see. But I did have that term on the denominational schools. And that is the term that's in the terms of union now. And that's why I, in the interests of confederation, in the interests of getting confederation, of winning confederation, was willing, quite willing, cheerfully willing, to pay that price, the price that of putting in the very Constitution itself, because our terms of union became part of the Constitution of Canada. Do you see, making it a constitutional provision, not just a law that can be changed or repealed or amended. No, the actual Constitution, putting it in the Constitution that the denominational school system would be given absolute rights. As a matter of fact, you know, it was after that happened and we became a province and I became premier that I discovered something that I really hadn't known, or if I had known it, I hadn't known it very intimately or very securely. I discovered that there was a denomination, a religious denomination in Newfoundland that was functioning. Consider thousands and thousands and thousands of followers of that religion. Strong religion, energetic and active religion, growing rapidly, that had no school rights. None. They had no right to get any money from the Department of Education, from the government, from the public chest. They had no rights to get any, and they didn't get any. They received not a solitary dollar. Here they were, a large religious denomination with their own schools, which they had to operate at their own expense, not getting a single dollar in any shape or form from the government. All the other denominations had their schools, were operating their schools, and the cost of operating them was coming from the government, the bulk of it, nearly all the cost. But this denomination, nothing. This was the Pentecostal denomination, and I'm proud today that I was the one who brought the law in to the House of Assembly. Now, not an amendment to the Constitution. It never did become part of the Constitution, but it became part of the law. And I would like to see the House of Assembly that would ever dare to change that law, depriving that denomination or any denomination, depriving them of the rights to financial help. And they can't abolish all denominations because the Constitution of Canada won't allow it, you see. That's why we have the denominational school system. Another thing I did, I promised the police force of St. John's and the fire department of St. John's. I promised them. I went and visited them, and because the rumor had gone around that the first thing that would happen when the Confederation came would be that the police force would be handed over to the city of St. John's to operate, and the fire department would be handed over to the same people to operate, the city of St. John's. And they didn't want that. They wanted to be employed and paid by the government of Newfoundland. And I promised them that as long as I lived, there would be no such change. And there hasn't been up to this minute. Now, it could be done because I have no authority, but I doubt that it will be.
That is something that wasn't in the terms of union.
Not in the terms of union. That was a personal promise, and I was there for 23 years as Premier, and that promise was kept for those 23 years. It's now, at this moment, 11 years since I was Premier, and it's still kept, and I prophesy that it'll continue to be kept.
You mentioned last time that we were talking about the decline in the importance of religion in social things around Newfoundland. Yet recently, in the more recent constitutional conferences and discussions that took place before the patriation of the Canadian Constitution, in Newfoundland there was the same concern for the denominational education system. And there were interest groups that went from Newfoundland to Ottawa to take part in the discussions. Do you find it odd or inconsistent that such an importance is still placed on the denominational education system,
Well,
where it's declined in other areas?
Well, let me say this. In the first place, there was no need of those visits to Ottawa. They were absolutely needless. They were unnecessary. The Constitution, as it was, guaranteed protection for the... it didn't need one syllable of change, of omission or addition. However, some people wanted to make doubly sure or trebly sure. Maybe no harm was done. In fact, no, not maybe, no harm was done. It was just a waste of effort. There was no need of it. Now, as to whether or not today there is the same attachment to the denominational school system, I have to remind you of the two things. In the first place, that the Roman Catholic Church in Newfoundland are exactly, there's not a particle of difference in their view today and their view of 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. They still stand very stoutly indeed, very adamantly for the denominational school system. And I have to remind you that the Pentecostal church is at least as adamant as is the Roman Catholic Church in their support of the denominational school system. Now, having reminded you of those two facts, let me remind you that all the other denominations have not become one denomination. They are still the same number of denominations, and denominationally, dogmatically, in their theology, in their religious beliefs, they haven't changed that I know of, that I've ever read or heard of. Never heard any rumors of any change. Dogmatically, theologically, they are exactly the same. All those other denominations, the Anglican, the United Church, Presbyterian, the Salvation Army, am I missing one? Those denominations, denominationally, are identically the same as they were. There may be a change of emphasis here or a change of emphasis there. They may attach a little more importance now to this aspect than they used to attach, or they may attach a little less now than they used to do. But basically, they are exactly the same, but not in the school system. And a lot of people don't understand, they seem not to understand this, that if the Anglican Church and the United Church and the Salvation Army and the Presbyterian Church, if they agree to merge their school efforts, to integrate their school systems, it doesn't mean that the only denominational schools there are now in Newfoundland are Roman Catholic schools and Pentecostal schools. That's not so. That's not the way it is at all. All schools in Newfoundland today are denominational, just as much as they ever were, just as much as they were before integration. You see, an integrated school is an Anglican school. An integrated school is also a United Church school. An integrated school is also a Presbyterian school and also a Salvation Army school and so on. And there still are the denominations, and there are the denominational boards. The denominational school system is here just as much as it ever was. It is. Now, you nod and maybe you're nodding just politely so as not to express disagreement, but don't you see that to be the case?
Why is this the case still, then? Is it, as I say, when things have changed in other social institutions so that religion doesn't matter, why has Newfoundland maintained this?
Oh, I see. Why is it that they are the same?
When you have, on the other hand...
I thought for a moment you were asking in what way are they the same? No, what is the reason why the school system is still denominational?
Is it
Well,
simply an aspect of tradition and the law, the constitutionality of the denominational education system that's maintained it?
that is one
I was
reason.
bringing up the instance recently of the representation made to the constitutional discussions that were intended to ensure that the denominational education system was maintained. In other words, it wasn't simply passively continuing what had already been here, accepting the status quo, but going out to make sure that the denominational education system was maintained.
No. The Constitution does not do that. The Constitution says that any money that the legislature of Newfoundland authorizes for education, and any money that the government spends on education must, no exception, must and shall be paid out on a basis of non-discrimination between denominations. The legislature of Newfoundland, except by its own law, which it can repeal tomorrow, the legislature of Newfoundland is not obliged to pay out any money to denominational schools. But if they do, then it must be on a basis of non-discrimination. They can't pay it to one denomination and not to another. It's got to be paid on a basis of on the same basis. There must be no discrimination. You can't give, say, $1 a pupil each month to the children in the Roman Catholic schools, and $1.50 each month to the students in other schools. They must all be treated on a basis of equality and non-discrimination. If the legislature and government are going to spend any money on education, that's how it must be spent. That's what's guaranteed in the Constitution. The denominational system is not guaranteed. But so long as there are denominational schools, and so long as the government spends any money on those schools, they must spend that money either none, or if they spend it at all, it must be on the basis of non-discrimination, you see.
So that if one denomination gets a certain amount, the other denominations must get the same.
Well, on the same basis. For instance, if it's on the basis of how many students attend this denominational school, it's so much per pupil, or it's so much per teacher, or it's so much per, well, whatever the basis, it must be the same basis for all.
To go on from that for a moment, do you think the educational system, it's probably not a fair question, is the educational system a good thing? You said that you helped to put it in the terms of union because it was politically a very good thing to do then, to not to split the country and to ensure winning the Confederation referendum. Do you think it a good thing that a denominational system of education has existed and continues to exist in Newfoundland? Is it divisive, or is it a good thing?
Well, now, let me be absolutely clear as to your question. I think I know what the question is. I think I understand the question. You're not asking whether it is right that there shall be a basis of equality and non-discrimination. If there is to be a denominational school system, if the denominations are to have their own schools, and if the government is to pay money to them, they shall pay it on a basis of non-discrimination. That's not your question. The question is it good to have denominational schools to start with? You could put your question in another way. Would it be smart, would it be wise, would it be just for the legislature of Newfoundland to bring in legislation and pass it. Make it the law. That no money will be paid to any denominational schools. In other words, not do away, by law, do away with the denominational school system, but do away with the business of paying money, which is another way of doing away, because if the government absolutely stopped paying money to the denominations, I'm afraid that most, if not all, of the denominations would find the grave difficulty, if not the impossibility, to find the money to take the place of the government. It comes from the same people with this difference, Every one of the 34 years that we've been a province, in every year, no, it's not one. It's not 1 year it was one way and 33 years another way. All 34 years, every year without an exception, over half the entire revenue of the Newfoundland government came from Ottawa, you see. And if the government got the House of Assembly to pass a law, and the law stopped the government from paying money to the churches, it would mean that today over half the money they're paying to the churches to run their schools, over half that money comes from Ottawa. That money would still come to Ottawa, from Ottawa, to the Newfoundland government, but the Newfoundland government wouldn't be passing it over to the churches. They would have that to spend on anything else they liked. And that's, what is it now? It's over $500 million, isn't it? Isn't it now or somewhere around $500 million a year, that is close to it, that the government are paying over to the churches. If they stopped paying it, and the churches had to find that money, I'm afraid there wouldn't be as many denominational schools. I'm afraid there wouldn't be as many teachers. I'm afraid that salaries and other expenditures on our school system wouldn't be as high. And in any case, when denominational hatred, when denominational bigotry, when denominational intolerance decline in volume, in intensity, when people generally, of all denominations, become more tolerant of each other, more tolerant of each other's religious beliefs, denominational schools, if they ever were a fomenter of intolerance or bigotry, if they ever were, certainly become much less so as people generally, as the population generally, and the churches of the population generally become less intolerant, more tolerant, more urbane, less bigoted. And of course that raises this question, a very interesting question. If the people of the world, or of any nation, or of any province, or state in a nation, or of any part of a province, if the people become less bigoted, less intolerant, is it because they are genuinely becoming less intolerant and less bigoted, or just more indifferent? Real tolerance, it seems to me, is this. You're an Anglican, you're a Salvationist, you're a Pentecostalist, you're a Roman Catholic. You know and you understand the beliefs, the teachings of your church. You understand them. You have a thorough understanding of them. You share them. You believe them. You follow them. But here I come along, or here you come along from another church with different beliefs that you believe equally sincerely and equally ardently. You believe them, but they're so different from mine. I'm intolerant of you. That's intolerance. But if I lose interest and knowledge of what my church teaches and preaches, if I get to know less and less about that and to care less and less, and then I'm more and more tolerant to you, of you and what you believe, is that tolerance or just indifference? And I ask myself the question, the growing now real tolerance is to adhere warmly to your own beliefs, but give you exactly the same rights that I claim for myself. That's tolerance. But if I give you the same rights as I claim for myself, and it's only because I don't claim any for myself, that's not tolerance, that's just indifference. And is this growing tolerance in the world and in Newfoundland and in Canada, is it real toleration, real tolerance, or is it just indifference? I'd like to know the answer to that. You hear people, you see your own evidences with your own eyes, and you hear with your own ears the evidences there are of a declining strength of the great worldwide religious movement. And then you come across reports of this denomination, that denomination. Church attendance has increased. There's a far livelier interest now in the last 3 years or 8 years or whatever than there was for a long time. It makes you wonder, which is it? Is religion destined? Is it destined to resume the place it held for thousands of years? To have it back? To come back into the same position of strength and influence, where the lives of all the people are molded and shaped and influenced by organized religion? Is that the destiny of religion or not? I look at a world today that is an awful lot different from the world that I grew up in. I don't know how true it is. They say that in the first 5,000 years of civilization, and sometimes I wonder if that's a misprint, because is civilization 5,000 years old to start with? But anyway, the saying is that in the first 5,000 years of civilization, knowledge doubled. At the end of the 5,000 years, there was twice as much knowledge in the world as there had been at the start. And that in the next 1,000 years, knowledge doubled again. And in the next 500 years, it doubled. In the next 100 years, it doubled. In the next 50 years, it doubled. And that it's doubled in the last 10 years. Now, if that's correct, this horrendous explosion of knowledge which now embraces, personal knowledge of having stepped out of a machine right onto the moon and strolled around on the moon. That's very practical, down to earth or down to moon knowledge, isn't it? There's been a terrific explosion of knowledge and explosion of science. Science is it's frightening, especially when it's wrongly used. Frightening. It's ghastly. It makes you wonder, is the human race destined only to remain on this particular planet only for another 5 or 8 years? Such is the development. In that new world, when perhaps religious faith and religious worship are needed more than ever before, are religious faith and religious worship destined to die in the face of this explosion of knowledge and science, you see? Just when it's needed most. I don't know. I'd like to know.
talking about education, perhaps this is a good opportunity to talk to you about your own interest in education that you've shown, that you showed after you became premier. I suppose political leaders have always at least paid lip service to their interest in education. It's always been one of the advantages of a developed country to have a good educational system. But I think you went further than that. You said somewhere recently that you considered your greatest accomplishment in your whole time as premier to have been the creation of this university, Memorial University. You went so far at one point as to make tuition to university free, to even offer salaries to people to go. The number of technical colleges increased from 0 before Confederation to, what are there, 7 now?
17.
17 across.
I'm not sure if it's 17 or 18, and I've seen a figure of 16. But from memory, I put them all there. There isn't a trade school in Newfoundland today that I didn't put there. When I say I didn't go up with my own hands and build it, but I caused it to be put there. And I can name every place, and when I name them up, it comes to 17. But I see others who call it 16. I have said that the 3 greatest things that have happened in Newfoundland from the beginning, and that's just short of 500 years, were its discovery by John Cabot. Not Leif Erikson, because Leif Erikson's discovery only lasted 18 or 20, 22 years and had no influence, no effect. It didn't mold Newfoundland in any shape or form, in any way. So I say the discovery of Newfoundland by John Cabot, the coming of Confederation, and the birth of this university, the 3 greatest and mightiest events in all our history. Nothing compares in importance to these 3 things in the life of Newfoundland. Its discovery, the coming of Confederation, and the birth of the university. And along with the birth of the university, the birth of 5 new colleges. The College of Fisheries, Navigation, the College of Tech, Trades and Technology, the College of Engineering, the College of Medicine, the College of Nursing, 5 great colleges, the coming of regional high schools and central high schools, the coming of the school bus, which is now costing each year 3 or 4 times as much as all education cost, under every heading that you can think of. All education costs the first year of Confederation. School buses are costing 2 or 3 times as much as that now. That whole astonishing rebirth, regeneration, new birth of the education effort in Newfoundland. It's astounding. It's incredible. But you've got to be 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, so that when it began 34 years ago, you were then 30 or 35 or 40 or 50 years of age. Better if you were 60 and could look back 60 years before 1934 and 1949 to appreciate the staggering, absolutely staggering effect. When the day I became Premier of Newfoundland, which was the day we became a province, the average pay of all our teachers in this new province that day, and it was at its peak then, it had never been as high as that before, at its peak was $862 a year for average for all our teachers. That was $16 a week was the pay of all our teachers. Well, when you go in 34 years from $800 to $30,000 a year, that's revolution, isn't it? No bloodshed, no barricades, no guns, but revolution. And that you can thank Confederation for. That wouldn't be so. There wouldn't be a university. There wouldn't be 5 colleges. There wouldn't be 17 trade schools. There wouldn't be a school bus system. There wouldn't be $30,000 a year average pay for all in the education field. That includes not only teachers, you see. It includes superintendents and inspectors and supervisors. But that's all part of the education fabric. All these things would not be. You wouldn't have 5 glorious, absolutely glorious arts and culture centers in St. John's and Gander and Grand Falls and Corner Brook and Grand Bank. You wouldn't have these but for Confederation. Education and culture, more than any other thing, have, or has, we call it all one, has benefited, has expanded, has grown to be the glory, surely, the glory of this province today.
Confederation certainly provided you with the wherewithal to do that, but why your own interest? Why would you make a claim such as the one that Memorial University is the greatest achievement for a man who has not had formal university education, received many degrees, honorary degrees? Often you find in people who haven't attended a university some sort of intolerance towards universities or to academic pursuits, vocations. To follow that list of things that you've done with the free tuition and the salaries, it seems that you've done more than most politicians in most countries to encourage education. Why did you feel personally, or as a premier, that education needed such a special interest in Newfoundland?
It seems to me that every country desperately, most desperately, except possibly in the communist countries, except for them, every country in the world is in most desperate need of universities for this reason, that if you step outside the walls of a university, you step instantly into the world of trade and commerce and industry, balance sheets, profit and loss, make money, lose money. But the world, you know, what's that wonderful line of English poetry? The world, something is much with the world. Making, what is it?
The world is too much with us.
Too much with, and making and spending or something.
Getting and spending, we lay waste our
That's
powers.
it. We will lay waste our powers. Except, you might say in the church, you say that hopefully, and except in the university. And again, you say that hopefully, because I'm not so naive as to suppose that if you have 700 or 800 faculty people in this university here, I forget what the number is, it's 700 or 800 men and women who are scholars, and who are the professors and associate professors and assistant professors and lecturers. They're the teachers of 10,000 students in this university. I'm not so naive as to think that each and every one of those 700 or 800 teachers is an idealist who spurns money, who spurns personal ambition, wanting a nicer house and a bigger pay and more clothes and to take more holidays and vacations and to travel, that they're devoid of all human ambition. I'm not that naive. But once you have a university, and it's a great center of learning, and especially research, not just passing on the knowledge that already exists, but discovering new knowledge, new ideas, new approaches, new themes, new theories. Once you have that, you've got what is, practically speaking, the one and only oasis of learning, of scholarship. There is in the world, the one and only. I'm not forgetting that some of the great corporations of great countries have research scientists on their staff to make a better salve or medicine or a better pill or a better machine or a better anything. But that, and that's okay. That's all right. I'm not condemning that. That'd be stupid to condemn it. And pragmatically, down to practical science, they are more useful than the university. But for basic original knowledge, if you don't have universities to do that, what in the name of God, and I ask it in the name of God, in a world of trade and commerce and industry and business and making money and profits and losses and balance sheets, a civilization built on that, consisting of that, what kind of world would it end if you didn't have universities? And I'm not naive about it. I would say that you have a much, much higher proportion of idealistic, clean-minded, original-minded men in a university than you have in a paper mill or, say, a mine, an iron mine. But I'm not so simple as to suppose that that every last person in a university on the staff is that kind of person. I don't think that for a moment. And then again, while I get annoyed sometimes, or used to when I was premier, at the implacable insistence of universities to be absolutely independent, well, that used to make me angry. And I would ask Lord Taylor, well, Lord Taylor, does that mean, this independence, does that mean that you can decide for yourselves what pay will be given to every member of the staff? And to hell with the government, and to hell with the House of Assembly, and to hell with the people. You are so independent that you're going to determine, no matter what anyone else gets, even in all the other schools, in the university, you're going to decide not only what subjects will be taught and how they'll be taught and what teachers, what professors will be engaged, but you're going to be absolutely so independent that you can determine what their pay is to be and what you're going to spend on this, that, and that your budget, you're going to be absolutely independent. You're going to have an independent budget. Somebody else is going to find the money and hand it over to you, and then you are going to act on that money as though you owned it, as though you originated it, as though you found it. It wasn't a gift given to you by the people of Newfoundland through the government. You're going to ignore that? I used to get angry about that. But as to what teachers will be taken on, what their qualifications shall be, what teaching will be done, what things will be taught, not only what subjects, but how this subject shall be taught, and how that's, if a university doesn't have absolute independence in that, it's not a university. It's not even a good department of government. So I have these. I used to argue with Dr. Moses Morgan when he was president. I had one or two discussions with the present president, Dr. Harris, and a few with Ray Goujiu when he was president on these matters. And I was educated. I've done an awful lot of reading. I've read an awful lot of books about universities and their purpose and their mission in life, and their importance and the nature of universities and so on. I've read an awful lot of that, and they filled me in with more of what they had read and their own ideas that they'd come across. So I didn't end up in ignoramus, so I never went to a university. I suppose I must be. Sometimes I think I must be. Not only because of the 25 or 30,000 books that I've read in my lifetime, not only because of that, but because of something else. I must be surely the most learned scholar, not only in Newfoundland today, but that ever was in Newfoundland, because why else would 10 universities bestow the highest possible honor on me? 10 universities make me a doctor. Now, you can't go higher than doctor, can you? That's the highest degree in scholarship and learning. Doctor. I get a kick out of the German practice. In Germany, a man is not really regarded. Getting a doctorate, is fine. And you're nothing if you haven't got it. But one doctorate. So you go after your second doctorate. You're a doctor of philosophy. Then you get another doctorate of science. Anyway, 2. And if you have 2 doctorates, you're not known as Dr. Schmidt. You're Dr. Schmidt. And if you have 3 doctorates, you're Dr. Schmidt. Now, what would that do to me if that practice were followed here in Newfoundland with 10 of them? No, my education, I got at Bishopfield College. I think I've told you before, have I? Yes. I've been at 5 schools in St. John's, 3 Church of England, as we used to call it then, 1 Methodist, which would now be called United Church, and 1 Roman Catholic. But the schooling I got in St. John's, really, and it's what all schools should do, and they fail if they don't. What I got from them was a love of learning, a love of reading, a mind that was terribly, sometimes embarrassingly inquisitive and curious. I wanted to know everything. That's why when I went to a place such as New York, I went to the Rand School of Social Science, and I took lectures from, which is all you do really in a university, isn't it? You listen to lectures. Well, I went to university. It wasn't called university. I went to the famous Rand, R-A-N-D, Rand School of Social Science. True, it was owned and operated by the Socialist Party of Greater New York, yes, but it didn't teach, it taught socialism, of course. It had courses on socialist theories and philosophy, socialist economics, but it also had straight economics and science and history and sociology and everything you could think of. And I took, over a period of 5 years, I went to that university, and I took lectures from some of the greatest scholars in all of the United States. You hear Thorstein Veblen. I took a course of lectures from Thorstein Veblen. I took lectures from Upton Sinclair, Alexander Goldenweiser, all kinds. Then I went to the Labor Temple over on 2nd Avenue in the Jewish Quarter. There I took, as a course of lectures, one of the most famous books ever written in the United States, the one by Will Durant, The Story of Philosophy. I took that as a course of lectures. I took as a course of lectures in Cooper Union, where Abraham Lincoln delivered one of his great speeches. I took from Everett Dean Martin a course of lectures which he made into his book. He's the founder, you might say, the great historian and philosopher of social psychology, the psychology of society, of groups, of social groups, because psychology exists not only in one individual person, all kinds of groups, social. He's the father of social psychology. So when these 10 universities across Canada made me a doctor, they were only catching up. They were only remedying the failures of those 3 universities in New York, where I, over a period of 5 years, I took practically every night of my life. I was at one of those taking lectures, you know. Oh, yes.
More than a lot
That's right, and it was it a labor of love in the, and in every one of them I became the sort of devil's advocate, in every class of that kind. I don't know if they have it in universities, regular universities, orthodox universities, but in those places, the questioner, the fellow was like Hyde Park. The hundreds of meetings that are open-air meetings that are held in Hyde Park in London would be a dead issue. But for the hecklers, it's the heckler who makes. The good heckler puts shrewd questions to the speaker, and if the speaker's got anything on the ball, he's delighted because it gives him the opening that he needs, you see, and it galvanizes attention in the rest of the audience. Well, I was the heckler in hundreds of those lectures, hundreds of them. I was the one who would ask the question. First of all, I was terribly curious. I wanted to know the answer. And secondly, I was not shy. And a lot of students would be a little too shy. Many of them were glad that I did ask, because they had it in their mind to ask and didn't have quite nerve enough, you see. It's great fun. It was great fun. And I wouldn't take back an hour of it.